You shouldn't be watching this.
Some jobs come with warnings. This one should have come with an exorcism. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened at Mercy General Hospital. I've been a nurse for 8 years. I've seen people die, watched families fall apart, held hands with patients taking their last breath. I thought I'd seen everything the human body and spirit could endure. I was wrong. It started 3 months ago, when I transferred to the night shift in the ICU. The pay was better, 20% more for working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I needed the money. My student loans weren't going to pay themselves, and day shift positions were impossible to find in this city. The first thing I noticed about Mercy General's ICU was how quiet it was at night. Not the peaceful quiet of healing, but the heavy, oppressive quiet of a place where something was holding its breath. The fluorescent lights hummed too loudly, and the air conditioning made sounds like whispers in the walls. My supervisor, Dolores, was a woman in her 60s who'd been working nights at Mercy for over 30 years. On my first day, she pulled me aside during break. "There's something you need to know about room 237, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been empty for 6 months, but don't go in there alone. Ever." I laughed. "Why? Is it haunted?" The look she gave me could have frozen blood. "Just don't go in alone." Room 237 was at the end of the East Wing, separated from the other patient rooms by a nurse's station and 2 heavy fire doors. During my first week, I walked past it dozens of times. The door was always closed, the room dark, but I could swear I sometimes heard sounds from inside. Not mechanical sounds, like monitors or ventilators, but human sounds. Whimpering, sometimes what sounded like muffled conversation. I asked Dolores about it again during my second week. "Who was the last patient in 237? I said. She was quiet for so long I thought she hadn't heard me. Finally, she said, "Eleanor Vance. She was here for 4 months before she died." What was wrong with her? Cancer. Started in her lungs, spread everywhere. But that's not what killed her. What do you mean?
Dolores glanced around to make sure we were alone. She stopped eating, stopped talking, just lay there staring at the ceiling, whispering to someone we couldn't see. The doctor said it was the medication, but she shook her head. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know when someone's talking to the dead." That night, I was working alone in the East Wing when I heard it clearly for the first time. A woman's voice coming from room 237, calling for help. "Hello? Hello, is someone there? Please, I need help." The voice was weak, desperate, exactly what you'd expect from a patient in distress. I grabbed my key card and headed for the room, my training overriding my unease. A patient needed help. That's what I was there for. But when I reached the door, my hand froze on the handle because I could see through the small window and room 237 was empty. Just a stripped bed, no equipment, no patient. The voice was still calling for help. I backed away from the door and went to check the census. No patients assigned to 237, no admissions scheduled. The room had been empty for 6 months, just like Dolores said. But I kept hearing the voice, fainter now, like it was coming from very far away. I told myself I was imagining things. Night shift does that to you, Makes you hear things that aren't there, see shadows that don't exist. I'd been working too many doubles, not getting enough sleep. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, 3:17 a.m. according to my phone, same desperate voice calling for help from an empty room. This time, I decided to investigate. I used my master key to unlock room 237 and stepped inside. The room was indeed empty, but the moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could hear my heartbeat echoing off the walls. The room smelled wrong. Not the usual hospital smell of disinfectant and antiseptic, but something organic and putrid like flowers left too long in water.
I was about to leave when I noticed something on the whiteboard where patient information was usually written. In shaky handwriting, someone had written, "Eleanor Vance, day 127, still here."
My blood turned to ice. I grabbed the eraser and wiped the board clean. But when I turned around, the writing was back, darker this time. Eleanor Vance, day 128. Why won't you help me? I ran from that room and didn't go back for 2 weeks. But room 237 wasn't done with me. It started with small things, equipment malfunctioning when I walked past the room, the elevator stopping at the second floor even when I pressed 3, phone calls to the nurse's station where nobody spoke, just shallow breathing and the sound of someone crying. Then I started seeing her. It was during my 3rd week when I first glimpsed her in my peripheral vision, a pale woman in a hospital gown, standing at the end of the hall near room 237. When I turned to look directly, she was gone, but I could smell that putrid flower scent she left behind. I tried to convince myself it was stress, fatigue, anything but what I knew it was. But denial became impossible the night I found her sitting in the break room. I walked in to grab coffee around 2 a.m., and there she was, sitting at the small table by the window. She was skeletal thin, her hospital gown hanging loose on her frame. Her skin was the color of old paper, and her hair was falling out in patches. But the worst part was her eyes, completely black, like someone had filled them with ink. She looked up when I entered and smiled, revealing teeth that were brown and cracked. "You're the new nurse," she said, her voice the same one that had been calling for help. "I've been waiting for you." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there staring at her. But I couldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the floor. "They all leave," she continued, her black eyes never blinking. "The doctors, the other nurses, they transfer away or quit. But you're still here." "You're dead," I managed to whisper. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Death isn't the end in a place like this. Too much pain, too much suffering. It soaks into the walls, into the floors. Some of us can't let go." "What do you want?" "I want what I've always wanted. I want someone to help me die." That's when I understood. Eleanor Vance hadn't died from cancer.
She died from neglect, from a system that had forgotten about her, left her alone to waste away in room 237 while the cancer ate her alive. She'd been calling for help for months, and no one had come. "I tried to call for help," she said, reading my thoughts. "Every night, but they stopped coming, stopped caring. I died alone, begging for someone to end my suffering." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Sorry isn't enough." Her smile faded, and her face became something terrible, something hungry. "I need you to finish what they started. I need you to help me find peace." "How?" "Room 237 isn't empty. My body is gone, but I'm still there, still suffering, still dying every night. You have to come back. You have to help me die properly." Before I could ask what she meant, she vanished. One moment she was there, the next I was alone in the break room, with the smell of rotting flowers and the sound of my own panicked breathing. I considered quitting that night, walked right up to Dolores's desk and almost handed in my resignation, but something stopped me. Maybe it was professional pride, or maybe it was genuine compassion for a patient who'd been failed by the system. Or maybe Eleanor Vance wasn't giving me a choice. The next night I found a patient chart on my desk. Eleanor Vance's chart with detailed notes about her final months. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking. A woman with no family, no visitors, slowly wasting away while understaffed nurses rushed past her room. The notes showed longer and longer gaps between check-ins, missed medications, ignored call button requests. She'd spent her last month completely alone, pressing the call button every few minutes, begging for help that never came. I made my decision.
At 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd been hearing her voice, I returned to room 237. This time, I came prepared. I brought a wheelchair, a morphine drip, and everything I'd need to ease someone's passing. Eleanor was waiting for me. She was lying in the bed, which was no longer empty. She looked exactly as she must have in her final days, emaciated, barely breathing, her black eyes full of pain and desperate hope.
"You came back," she whispered. "I'm here to help," I said, setting up the IV stand. What happened next should have been simple. I should have administered the morphine, sat with her as she passed peacefully, and that should have been the end of it. But Eleanor Vance had been waiting too long, suffering too long. She wasn't going to pass quietly into the night. As the morphine entered her system, she began to change. Her appearance shifted, cycling through different stages of decay. One moment, she looked like a dying cancer patient, the next, like a corpse that had been decomposing for months. Her voice changed too, sometimes weak and human, sometimes something else entirely. "They ignored me," she said, her voice echoing from multiple directions. "Left me to rot, just like they'll leave you." "That's not true," I said, but my voice was shaking. "You think you're helping, but you're just making it worse. You're feeding it." "Feeding what?" That's when I looked around the room and realized my mistake. Room 237 wasn't just haunted by Eleanor Vance. She was just the most recent addition to something much older, much hungrier. The walls were covered in names, hundreds of them scratched into the paint by fingernails. Patients who died alone, forgotten, abandoned by the system that was supposed to care for them. Eleanor Vance was just one ghost among many. And they were all hungry for the same thing: acknowledgement, care, the attention they'd been denied in life. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. The room was freezing now, and I could see my breath in great puffs of vapor. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, her black eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights like an animal's. "You can't leave," she said. "None of us can leave. This is where we died, and this is where we stay." The other voices started then, dozens of them, all calling for help, all begging for attention, all demanding the care they'd never received. The temperature kept dropping, and frost began forming on the windows.
I realized then that I'd made a terrible mistake. I hadn't been helping Eleanor pass on. I'd been feeding the thing that Room 237 had become. A concentration of abandonment and neglect so intense it had taken on a life of its own. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Dolores's voice, calling my name. The sound of keys jingling, the door handle turning. "Don't go in there alone," Dolores had warned me. She'd been protecting me, just like she'd probably protected other nurses before me. The door opened, and Dolores stepped inside with Father Martinez, the hospital chaplain. They were both carrying crosses, and Father Martinez immediately began speaking in Latin. The temperature in the room started to rise. The voices began to fade. Eleanor Vance looked at me one last time, and for a moment her face was human again. "Thank you for trying," she said, and then she was gone. Father Martinez continued his prayers while Dolores helped me out of the room. In the hallway, I collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. "How did you know?" I asked. "Security cameras," Dolores said. "I've been watching room 237 for 30 years. Every few months, someone new tries to help. The room feeds on compassion as much as neglect." "What is it?" "Purgatory," Father Martinez said simply. "A place where suffering has become so concentrated it's taken on its own existence. We can't destroy it, but we can contain it." They were right about containment. Room 237 was sealed the next day, the door welded shut, the number removed from the hospital directory. According to the official records, it no longer exists. But I know it's still there. I know because I can still hear them sometimes, late at night when the hospital is quiet. Voices calling for help from a room that isn't supposed to exist anymore. Patients who died alone, still waiting for someone to care. I transferred back to day shift the next week. The administration didn't ask questions, and I didn't volunteer information. Some things are better left buried. But here's what I can't forget, what keeps me awake at night. I was trying to help. I thought I was doing the right thing. And that's exactly what room 237 was counting on.
The thing about purgatory is that it's not just a place of punishment. It's a place of hope. And hope, when it's fed by good intentions and genuine compassion, can become just as dangerous as despair. I still work at Mercy General, but I've never gone back to the second floor. I've heard rumors that they've assigned the East Wing to storage now, that no patients are housed there anymore. But sometimes when I'm working late and the hospital is quiet, I'll get a call from the second floor. The caller ID shows room 237, which is impossible because the room doesn't exist anymore. When I answer, there's just breathing on the other end, and sometimes very faintly, a woman's voice asking for help. I don't answer those calls anymore, but they keep coming. Every night at 3:17 a.m. And I know that someday, when I'm tired enough or compassionate enough or just worn down enough by the weight of suffering I see every day, I'll answer that call. I'll take the elevator to the second floor, I'll find the room that doesn't exist, and I'll try to help, because that's what nurses do. But room 237 isn't looking for healing. It's looking for company. And once you feed something that hungry, it never stops wanting more. Trust your instincts out there. And if you ever work the night shift at a hospital with a room that's always empty, always cold, always calling for help, don't go in alone. Actually, don't go in at all.
Don't go in alone.
The children's ward. Some hospitals have wings that should never have been built. St. Catherine's Children's Hospital was one of them. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in Ward 7. I've been a pediatric nurse for 12 years. I've held babies through their first surgeries, comforted children facing terminal diagnoses, and watched families navigate the worst moments of their lives. I thought I understood the full spectrum of childhood fear. I was wrong. It started 6 months ago when I took a position at St. Catherine's Children's Hospital. The pay was excellent, 40% more than my previous job, and they desperately needed experienced pediatric nurses. The hospital had a reputation for cutting-edge treatment, but also for high staff turnover in certain departments. Ward 7 was one of those departments. Located on the 3rd floor, Ward 7 housed children with long-term illnesses, cancer patients, kids with rare genetic disorders, children who'd been there for months or even years. The ward was designed to feel more like a home than a hospital, with colorful murals, play areas, and rooms decorated with cartoon characters. But there was something wrong with the atmosphere. The children were too quiet, too watchful. They'd stop talking when adults entered the room and exchanged glances that seemed far too knowing for their ages. My supervisor, Janet, was a veteran nurse who'd been at St. Catherine's for 15 years. During my orientation, she pulled me aside. "The kids in Ward 7 are special," she said carefully. "They've been through a lot. Sometimes they say things that might sound unusual. Don't take it too seriously." "What kind of things?" "They talk about visitors sometimes, people who aren't on the family lists. It's normal for sick children to have imaginary friends." I nodded, but something in her tone suggested there was more to it. My first week was routine. I administered medications, helped with meals, and got to know the children. There were 8 kids in Ward 7, ranging from 5 to 14 years old. They were all incredibly well behaved, almost eerily. It was during my second week that I first heard about the sad man. I was doing evening rounds when I overheard 2 of the children talking in the playroom. Emma, a 7-year-old with leukemia, was whispering to Marcus, a 10-year-old with a rare neurological condition. "He came to see me again last night," Emma was saying. "He looked so sad. I wanted to give him a hug." "Did he say anything?" Marcus asked. "He never talks. He just stands there and cries, but not like regular crying. Silent crying." I cleared my throat as I entered the room. Both children immediately stopped talking and looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "What are you two talking about?" I asked gently. "Nothing," Emma said quickly. "Just pretend games." That night, I asked Janet about it during our shift change. "The sad man?" she said, her expression tightening. "It's just, the kids have active imaginations. Long-term patients sometimes develop shared fantasies. It's a coping mechanism." "But why is he sad?" "Nurse Williams, I need you to understand something. These children are facing mortality at an age when they should be worrying about homework and playmates. They process trauma differently than adults. The sad man represents their own sadness, their own fear. It's psychological." Her explanation made sense, but it didn't explain why she looked so uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, I heard more references to the sad man. The children would whisper about him during quiet times, always careful to stop when adults approached. According to their hushed conversations, he visited different rooms after midnight, always alone, always crying. "He doesn't want to hurt us," I heard Lucy, a 12-year-old with cystic fibrosis, tell her roommate. "He just wants us to see him, to know he's there." I decided to investigate. I requested the night shift for Ward 7, telling Janet I wanted to get to know the children better. She seemed reluctant, but approved the change. My first night on the ward was quiet. I made my rounds every hour, checking on the children, administering medications, updating charts. All the kids seemed to be sleeping peacefully. But at 12:47 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of crying, soft, heartbroken sobbing coming from the direction of room 314, where Emma and her roommate Sarah were sleeping. I hurried down the hallway, my soft-soled shoes silent on the polished floor. The crying grew louder as I approached the room, but when I looked through the small window in the door, both children appeared to be asleep. I used my keycard to enter the room quietly. Emma was lying on her side, facing the wall. Sarah was curled up in her bed, her breathing deep and regular. Neither child was crying, but I could still hear the sobbing. It was coming from the corner of the room, near the window. I looked, but there was nothing there, just an empty chair and a small table with some books on it. The crying stopped abruptly. I checked on both children. They were definitely asleep, undisturbed. I was about to leave when Emma's eyes opened. "Is he here?" she whispered. "Who, sweetie?" "The sad man. I can feel him when he's here. He makes the room cold." Now that she mentioned it, the room did feel colder than the rest of the ward. I checked the thermostat. It was set to the same temperature as the other rooms. "Emma, there's no one here but us." She sat up in bed, her eyes wide and serious. "He's not gone. He's just hiding. He doesn't like it when grown-ups try to see him." "What does he look like?" "He's tall and thin, and he wears a white coat like a doctor. But his face..." She shuddered. "His face is all wrong, like someone drew it with a crayon and then erased parts of it." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Emma, you were dreaming. It's okay to have bad dreams sometimes."
"I wasn't dreaming," she said firmly. "Ask Marcus. Ask Lucy. Ask any of us. We all see him." The next morning, I decided to review the security footage. St. Catherine's had cameras in all the hallways and common areas. though not in the patient rooms for privacy reasons. The security office was in the basement, manned by a bored-looking guard named Pete, who was scrolling through his phone. "I need to see the footage from Ward 7 last night," I said, showing him my ID badge. "What time?" "Around 12:45 a.m., room 314. Pete pulled up the footage on his monitor. The hallway camera showed me walking toward room 314, standing outside the door, then entering. The timestamp showed 12:47 a.m. "That's weird," Pete said, frowning at the screen. "What?" "Look at the image quality. See how it gets all fuzzy right before you show up? And the temperature reading in the corner. It drops about 10 degrees for no reason." He was right. The footage became grainy and distorted for about 30 seconds, then cleared up, just as I appeared in the frame. "Does this happen often?" "More than it should. Always on the 3rd floor, always around midnight. We've had technicians check the cameras dozens of times. They can't find anything wrong with them." I spent the rest of the day asking subtle questions to the other nurses. What I learned disturbed me. The sad man wasn't a new phenomenon. Children had been reporting him for at least 3 years. The descriptions were always consistent. Tall, thin, wearing a white coat, with a face that seemed incomplete or distorted. He appeared only at night, only in patient rooms, and only to the children. No adult had ever seen him. But there was something else. I discovered that Ward 7 had been built on the site of an older wing that had been demolished in 1987. The old wing had housed the hospital's psychiatric unit, including a section for disturbed children.
That night, I decided to stay awake and watch. I positioned myself at the nurse's station, with a clear view of the hallway. At exactly 12:30 a.m., the temperature in the ward began to drop. I could see my breath in the air, and frost started forming on the windows. The children began to stir, not waking up, but turning restlessly in their beds as if sensing something approaching. At 12:45 a.m., I heard it again, the sound of crying. But this time it was coming from multiple rooms. Soft, heartbroken sobbing echoing through the ward. I looked down the hallway, and that's when I saw him. He was standing outside room 316, exactly as the children had described. Tall and thin, wearing a white doctor's coat that seemed to flow around him like it was made of mist. His face was the most disturbing part. It looked like someone had started to draw a human face, but had given up halfway through. Features that should have been there weren't, and the ones that were seemed to shift and blur when I tried to focus on them. He was crying silently, his shoulders shaking with grief. I wanted to call out, to challenge him, but I found I couldn't speak. It was as if my voice had been stolen. I could only watch him as he moved from room to room, standing outside each door, weeping for reasons I couldn't understand. When he reached room 314, Emma's room, he paused. For a moment, he turned and looked directly at me. His incomplete face was filled with such profound sadness that I felt tears streaming down my own cheeks. Then, he was gone. I rushed to room 314 and found Emma sitting up in bed, looking toward the corner where I'd heard the crying the night before. "He was here," she said simply. "He wanted me to tell you something." "What?" "He said his name is Dr. Reeves. He said he's sorry for what he did to the children." Dr. Reeves. The name was familiar. I'd seen it somewhere in the hospital records. The next day, I went to the hospital's archives and requested personnel files from the 1980s. It took hours of searching, but I finally found him. Dr. Michael Reeves had been the head of the pediatric psychiatric unit from 1983 to 1987. His file contained glowing reviews for his first 3 years, but then something changed. There were complaints from parents, reports of unusual treatment methods, and finally, a police investigation. The details were horrific. Dr. Rees had been conducting unauthorized experiments on the children in his care. Psychological manipulation, sensory deprivation, and worse. 7 children had died under his care before the investigation was completed. But Dr. Reeves never faced trial. The night before his arrest, he was found dead in his office, having taken his own life. His suicide note was brief. "I cannot live with what I've done to these innocent children." The psychiatric unit was closed immediately and demolished 2 years later. Ward 7 was built on the exact same location. I realized then what I was seeing. Dr. Reeves wasn't a malevolent spirit trying to harm the children. He was trapped in an endless cycle of grief, condemned to witness the suffering of sick children and remember his own crimes against innocents. The children could see him because their illness had made them sensitive to the thin places between worlds. They weren't afraid of him because they understood, in the way that only children can, that he was more broken than they were. But knowing the truth didn't make it easier to work in Ward 7. The sad man continued to appear, night after night, crying for the children he'd hurt and the children he now watched over. The temperature drops, the camera malfunctions, and the children's whispered conversations about their midnight visitor all continued. I tried to help. I researched methods for helping trapped spirits find peace. I even brought in a priest to bless the ward. Nothing worked. Dr. Reeves was bound to that place by the weight of his guilt, and no amount of prayer or good intentions could release him. The breaking point came 3 months later. I was working the night shift when I heard shouting from room 318. I ran to find Tommy, a 9-year-old with a brain tumor, sitting up in bed and screaming. "He's trying to help me," Tommy was yelling. "He wants to fix what's wrong with me." I looked toward the corner where Tommy was pointing and saw Dr. Reeves more clearly than ever before. His incomplete face was twisted with desperate determination, and his hands were reaching toward Tommy as if trying to perform some kind of medical procedure.
"No," I said firmly, stepping between them. "You can't help him. You've done enough." Dr. Reeves looked at me, and for the first time I heard his voice, hollow and echoing like it was coming from very far away. "I have to fix them," he said. "I have to make up for what I did." "You can't fix this. You can't change what happened. The only thing you can do is let them be." His form began to waver like smoke in a breeze. "But they're suffering, just like the others suffered because of me." "They're not suffering because of you. They're sick, but they're not alone. They have people who love them, people who are trying to help them the right way." Dr. Reeves looked around the room, at the colorful decorations, the get well cards, the toys and books that showed how much these children were loved. It was so different from the sterile psychiatric unit he'd overseen. "I failed them," he whispered. "I failed them all." "Yes, you did. But you can't fix that by trying to help these children. The best thing you can do is leave them in peace." He looked at Tommy one more time, then back at me. "Will you take care of them?" "We already are." Dr. Reeves nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he stopped crying. His form began to fade, becoming more translucent with each passing second. "Thank you," he said, and then he was gone. The temperature in the room immediately returned to normal.
Tommy stopped screaming and lay back down, already falling asleep. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over Ward 7 for months began to lift. I never saw Dr. Reeves again. Neither did the children. But I kept working in Ward 7 because someone needed to watch over those kids. Someone needed to make sure they felt safe and loved and cared for the way all children deserve to feel. Sometimes, late at night, when the ward is quiet, I think about Dr. Reeves and the children he hurt so long ago. I think about the weight of guilt and the power of redemption. I think about the thin line between helping and harming, between healing and hurting.
And I think about the responsibility we all have to protect the most vulnerable among us. The children in Ward 7 don't talk about the sad man anymore. They sleep peacefully through the night, undisturbed by grief that isn't their own. They focus on getting better, on fighting their illnesses, on being kids despite everything they're going through. But sometimes, when I'm checking on them in the early morning hours, I'll find a child awake, staring thoughtfully at the corner where Dr. Reeves used to stand. "Is he gone?" they'll ask. "Yes," I always tell them, "he's gone." And they'll smile and go back to sleep, because they know they're safe now. The sad man found his peace, and so did they. But I learned something important during those months in Ward 7. The dead don't always haunt the living because they want to cause harm. Sometimes they haunt us because they want to make amends. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is help them understand when it's time to let go. Trust your instincts when you're working with children. They see things adults can't, feel things we've forgotten how to feel. And if you ever work in a place where children whisper about visitors that no one else can see, listen to them. They might be seeing someone who desperately needs to be seen. But remember, not all spirits can be saved. Some are too broken, too lost in their own guilt and grief. The best thing you can do for them and for the living is to help them find peace, even if that peace means letting.
I will treat you.
The morgue mix-up. Some mistakes can't be undone. This one cost me my sanity. Let me tell you what really happened at Riverside Medical Center that night, because the official report is a lie. They called it a clerical error, blamed it on procedural oversight, and swept the whole thing under the rug with administrative efficiency that would have been impressive if it weren't so terrifying. The truth is, dead people don't just get up and walk to the waiting room, but Margaret Holloway did. I've been working as a morgue attendant for 12 years. It's not glamorous work. Most people can't even look at me when I tell them what I do for a living, but it pays well, and somebody has to do it. The dead deserve dignity, even if they can't ask for it anymore. I thought I understood death. I thought I knew its rules, its boundaries, its absolute finality. Margaret Holloway taught me otherwise. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I remember because October is always busy, something about the season brings out the worst in people, and the worst in people usually ends up on my table. I was working the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., alone except for the security guard who made his rounds every 2 hours. The call came in around 11:30 p.m. Natural death, they said. Margaret Holloway, age 67, found by her neighbor after she'd missed their weekly bridge game. Heart failure, most likely. No family, no next of kin. The county would handle arrangements. Standard procedure. Body arrives, I process the paperwork, perform the intake, store the body until the coroner's examination. Simple, clean, final. Margaret arrived at 12:45 a.m. in a standard body bag delivered by 2 EMTs who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She was a small woman, maybe 5'2", with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd been pretty once before. Time and loneliness had worn her down. "Poor thing," said Jim, the older EMT. "Neighbors said she'd been dead for at least 3 days before anyone found her." I nodded, making notes on my clipboard. "Any medical history?" "Nothing unusual. Widowed, retired, kept to herself. Doctor said her heart just gave out." After they left, I wheeled Margaret into the prep room. This was routine. I'd done it hundreds of times before. Remove personal effects, document any marks or injuries, assign a storage number, transfer to the cooler. But when I unzipped the body bag, Margaret's eyes were open. Not unusual, I told myself. Happens all the time. Muscles relax, eyelids don't always stay closed. I'd seen it before. Nothing to worry about. Except Margaret's eyes weren't the cloudy, vacant stare of death. They were clear, bright brown, and they were looking right at me. I checked her pulse. Nothing. No heartbeat, no breathing, skin cool to the touch. She was definitely dead. Had been for days, according to the EMTs. But those eyes... I closed them manually and continued with the intake. Removed her wedding ring, a small gold band worn thin with age. Noted a small scar on her left hand, probably from childhood. Everything normal. Everything by the book. I was filling out the paperwork when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound, like fingernails on metal. I looked up. Margaret's eyes were open again, and now she was looking at something behind me. The scratching continued. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty prep room, the steel tables, the cabinet of instruments. When I looked back at Margaret, her eyes had closed again. I decided I was overthinking things. Night shift does that to you. Makes you paranoid, makes you see things that aren't there. I finished the intake and wheeled Margaret to the cooler, sliding her into drawer number 7. The scratching stopped. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on paperwork, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just Margaret's eyes, though that was disturbing enough. It was the way the temperature in the prep room had dropped, the way the fluorescent lights had flickered, the way my skin had crawled when I'd touched her. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft footsteps, shuffling, like someone in hospital slippers. I looked up from my desk, but the hallway was empty. Security wasn't due for another hour, and no one else had access to the morgue at night. The footsteps continued, getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. The hallway was empty, but I could smell something. Not the usual morgue smells of disinfectant and formaldehyde, but something else. Something floral and sweet, like the perfume an elderly woman might wear. I followed the scent to the cooler room. All the drawer handles were properly secured, all the temperature gauges reading normal. But when I got to drawer number 7, the handle was warm to the touch. I opened it. The drawer was empty. Margaret Holloway was gone. I checked the paperwork. Maybe I'd put her in the wrong drawer. Maybe I'd made a mistake. But the log clearly showed drawer 7, and the other drawers were either empty or contained bodies that had been there for days. I called security. Frank, the night guard, was a good guy, ex-military, calm under pressure, not the type to panic. When he arrived, I explained what had happened. "You sure you put her in there?" he asked, shining his flashlight into the empty drawer. Positive. Body bag, gurney, everything. Frank scratched his head. Well, she ain't here now. Bodies don't just walk away. We searched the entire morgue, every room, every closet, every drawer. Nothing. Margaret Holloway had simply vanished. Maybe someone moved her, Frank suggested. Maybe there was a mix-up with the paperwork. But we both knew that was impossible. I was the only one with access to the morgue at night, and I'd been at my desk all night. The security cameras would have recorded anyone entering or leaving. We went to check the footage. The cameras showed me wheeling Margaret into the prep room at 12:47 a.m. They showed me completing the intake, closing her eyes, filling out paperwork. They showed me wheeling her to the cooler at 1:23 a.m. and sliding her into drawer 7. But at 1:47 a.m., the cameras showed something else. They showed Margaret Holloway walking out of the cooler room. Not being wheeled out, not being carried. Walking. She was still in her hospital gown, still barefoot, but she was moving under her own power. Her gait was slow, unsteady, like someone learning to walk again. She paused at the door to the prep room, looked directly at the camera, and smiled. Then she walked down the hallway toward the elevator, and the cameras lost track of her. Frank and I stared at the monitor in silence. Finally, Frank spoke. "That's impossible." "I know." "Dead people don't walk." "I know." "So what the hell did we just watch?" I didn't have an answer. I called my supervisor, Dr. Chen, and woke him up. He listened to my explanation with the patience of someone who dealt with night shift hysteria. "Bodies don't disappear," he said. "Check your paperwork again. Check the other drawers. She's there somewhere." "Dr. Chen, I'm telling you, check again. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While we waited, Frank and I searched the morgue one more time. We checked every drawer, every room, every possible hiding place. We even checked the loading dock, thinking maybe someone had wheeled her outside. Nothing. Dr. Chen arrived with coffee and skepticism. He reviewed the paperwork, checked the drawers, and watched the security footage. The skepticism faded quickly. "This is impossible," he said, echoing Frank's words. "That's what we said. Bodies they don't do this." But they did. Margaret Holloway had done exactly this. Dr. Chen made some calls. Within an hour, the morgue was full of people. Hospital administrators, security supervisors, even a police detective. They all watched the footage, all saw the same impossible thing. The official decision was to treat it as a theft. Someone had somehow broken into the morgue, stolen Margaret's body, and created fake footage to cover their tracks. It was the only logical explanation. Except for the part where the cameras showed Margaret walking out under her own power. "Digital manipulation," the detective said. "Someone doctored the footage." "Why would someone steal a body?" I asked. "Could be anything. Medical research, organ harvesting, some kind of sick prank. We'll investigate." But I knew they wouldn't find anything, because there was nothing to find. Margaret Holloway had walked out of the morgue because she'd wanted to. The question was, where had she gone? The answer came at 6:30 a.m., just as my shift was ending. I was gathering my things when Sandra, the day shift receptionist, called down to the morgue. "Hey, we've got a situation up here. There's an elderly woman in the waiting room who says she's been here all night. She's wearing a hospital gown and no shoes, and she's asking for someone named Margaret. My blood turned ice. I'll be right up. I took the elevator to the main floor, my heart pounding. The waiting room was nearly empty, just a few early morning visitors and one elderly woman sitting in a chair by the window. She was wearing a hospital gown. She was barefoot. She had silver hair and a small scar on her left hand. It was Margaret Holloway. She looked up when I approached, and her eyes were the same clear brown I'd seen on the prep table. But now they were filled with confusion, fear, and something else. Something that looked like hope. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft and uncertain. "I'm looking for my friend, Margaret Holloway."
She was supposed to meet me here for our bridge game, but I can't find her anywhere. I stared at her, trying to process what I was seeing. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Margaret," she said, looking puzzled. "Margaret Holloway. I live at 412 Maple Street. I was supposed to meet my friend Margaret here, but..." She looked around the waiting room, confused. "I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember coming here." "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions." "Of course. But first, have you seen my friend? She's about my height, silver hair, always wears her wedding ring. We play bridge every Tuesday." The wedding ring. I'd removed it during the intake, logged it with her personal effects. I looked at her left hand. The ring was there, exactly where it should be. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." "But what about Margaret?" "We'll find her, I promise." I called Dr. Chen and explained the situation. He arrived within minutes, took one look at Margaret, and went pale. "This is impossible," he said for the third time that night. "She doesn't remember dying. She doesn't remember anything after Tuesday night." Dr. Chen examined her carefully. Pulse, normal. Breathing, normal. Skin temperature, normal. She was alive, completely and undeniably alive. "How is this possible?" he asked. "I don't know. But I had a theory, one that I didn't share with Dr. Chen or anyone else. Margaret had been alone when she died. No family, no friends, no one to notice she was gone for 3 days. She died expecting to play bridge with her friend Margaret, a friend who I was beginning to suspect existed only in her increasingly confused mind. Maybe death wasn't as final as I thought. Maybe sometimes, when someone dies with unfinished business, with unfulfilled expectations, with nowhere else to go, they just come back. Maybe Margaret had come back to meet Margaret. The hospital handled the situation with typical administrative efficiency. Margaret was admitted for observation, given a psychiatric evaluation, and diagnosed with severe confusion and memory loss. Her death certificate was quietly amended to "presumed dead, later found alive." The whole incident was classified as a clerical error. I was interviewed by hospital administration, police, and eventually someone from the county coroner's office. They all asked the same questions. Was I sure she was dead? Had I checked for vital signs? Was there any possibility I'd made a mistake? I told them what they wanted to hear. Maybe I'd been careless. Maybe I'd been tired. Maybe I'd assumed she was dead without checking properly. But I knew the truth.
Margaret Holloway had been dead for 3 days when she arrived at the morgue. She'd been dead when I'd processed her intake, dead when I'd put her in the cooler, dead when the security cameras had recorded her walking out. And now she was alive. The story should have ended there. Margaret was transferred to a long-term care facility where she lived for another 6 months before dying peacefully in her sleep. The official cause of death was heart failure, the same as her first death certificate. But the story didn't end there. Because 3 days after Margaret's second death, I got a call from the care facility. "We've had an incident," the nurse said. "One of our patients is missing. Margaret Holloway. She was in her room at bed check, but when we came back an hour later, she was gone." "Did you check the other rooms?" "Everywhere. But here's the strange part. One of our other residents, Mrs. Patterson, said she saw Margaret in the rec room around midnight. Said she was sitting at the card table playing solitaire, waiting for someone to join her for bridge." I drove to the facility that night. Mrs. Patterson was in her 80s, sharp as a tack, and absolutely certain about what she'd seen. She was there, clear as day. Asked me if I wanted to play bridge. Said she was waiting for her friend Margaret. When I told her Margaret was her own name, she got confused. Said that couldn't be right. Said she was meeting her friend Margaret for their weekly game.
They found Margaret the next morning in the facility's chapel, sitting in the front pew with her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing the same hospital gown she died in, and she was smiling peacefully. She was also completely, undeniably dead. The coroner's examination confirmed what I already knew. Margaret had been dead for hours, possibly since the previous evening. But the night staff swore they'd seen her in the rec room at midnight, and the security cameras confirmed it. Margaret Holloway had died twice, and both times she'd come back looking for her friend. I quit the morgue after that, transferred to a different department, different shift, different building. I told people I needed a change, wanted to work with the living for a while. But the truth was, I couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. If Margaret could come back, if death wasn't as final as I'd thought, then what about all the other bodies I'd processed over the years? What about the ones who died alone, confused, with unfinished business? I still work at Riverside Medical Center, but now I'm in patient transport. I wheel people to their procedures, help them get where they need to go. It's simple work, straightforward, no surprises. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm working the overnight shift, I'll get a call from the morgue. The caller ID shows an extension that doesn't exist anymore, a number that was disconnected years ago. When I answer, there's just silence on the other end. And then, very faintly, I hear a woman's voice. "Hello, is this the Bridge Club? I'm looking for my friend Margaret. We're supposed to play cards tonight." I hang up, but the calls keep coming. Every Tuesday night at 11:30 p.m., the same time Margaret's body had arrived at the morgue that first night. I don't answer anymore, but I know what she's looking for. She's looking for the one person who understood her, who cared about her, who would notice if she didn't show up for their weekly game. The problem is, that person was Margaret herself. She'd been living alone for so long, been so isolated and confused, that she'd created an imaginary friend to keep her company. And when she died, she couldn't let go of that connection, couldn't accept that there was no one waiting for her. So she keeps coming back, keeps looking for the friend who never existed.
keeps trying to fulfill the promise she made to herself. The morgue at Riverside Medical Center has been renovated since then. New equipment, new procedures, new staff. But they still get calls sometimes, late at night, from someone asking about the bridge club. And sometimes, when they're processing a body that's been found after days or weeks alone, they'll find an extra chair pulled up to the prep table in the morning, as if someone had been keeping the deceased company, waiting with them for a friend who would never come. Death, I've learned, isn't just about the body stopping. It's about the spirit accepting that it's time to go. And sometimes, when someone dies with too much hope, too much loneliness, too much unfinished love, they just can't accept it. They keep coming back, looking for the connections they never had in life. Margaret Holloway taught me that death isn't the end of suffering. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. And sometimes, the dead don't rest because they're still waiting for someone to care. If you work in a hospital, a morgue, anywhere that deals with the dying and the dead, remember this: loneliness doesn't end with death. It just changes form. And if you ever get a call from someone asking about a bridge game, someone looking for a friend named Margaret, don't hang up too quickly. She's been waiting a very long time for someone to answer.
I'm waiting for you.